sequence at the start with the music and the video of Union Pacific number 844 got your toes tapping and perked your interest up. I think one of the reasons that Union Pacific is my favorite railroad and has been for a long time is they're very, very connected to their heritage. They were originally formed in 1862, and they one of the oldest corporate identities in the United States, unique corporate identities, and they were a major part in the building of our country. And the neat thing about it is Union Pacific carries this heritage, and they give it a lot of attention. And they were the principal railroad, one of the principal railroads in maintaining steam locomotives as a remembrance of that heritage. And the locomotive that you saw, number 844, has the distinction of being the only steam locomotive that was never retired from active service. She was active on the Union Pacific roster ever since they received her in the 1940s. And this is my model of number 844. And I'm going to have it running on the layout, as you see on some of the videos coming up here with the sound, and you can get to see it actually run. And some of the folks have said that they like the videos we're doing on this, but when are we going to see trains run? Well, that's going to be a little bit of time yet, because there's a lot of work to do on the layout, but I'll step you through the progress, and we'll get to the point where sometime, hopefully in a few months, you'll see some trains run in the staging yard at least. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about this locomotive, and we'll click on a close-up here and we'll point out some of the features of it. This is my model of Union Pacific number 844. It's built by Athearn model locomotives, and it's one of their Genesis series models, which is their high-end models, which they produce in limited numbers. And it's a special release that they have of this locomotive. And this is 844 as she appears today. A little bit of facts about the 844. She was a member of the Union Pacific class FEF3. The FEF3 class is the third of a series of the FEF class of locomotives. There were 45 total. The last 10 were FEF3. And interestingly, this is the last of the 10, number 844. They were numbered 800 to 844. And she was the last steam locomotive built for the Union Pacific Railroad. And she was built by the American Locomotive Company in Schenectady, New York. And she has never been retired from the active roster of locomotives of the Union Pacific Railroad. And they kept her as a living, they call her the living legend, an ambassador for the railroad, and she travels around their system to publicize the railroad for civic events, and it's quite a draw. Whenever 844 shows up, people come out of the woodworks to see her. She was built in Schenectady, New York, by the American Locomotive Company. She was actually built on Christmas Eve, finished on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1944. And she was built at that time to help with the critical traffic problems the Union Pacific was having in moving wartime freight and passenger. And so they applied to the War Reserves Board and got permission to have 10 more of these locomotives built. And she has builder serial number 72791. She is what we call a northern wheel arrangement, and that's according to what's called the Wyeth notation system, the system we use to designate types of steam locomotives and diesel and electric locomotives in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico and much of Latin America. The Wyeth system is based on the wheel arrangement of the locomotive, and number 844 in the Wyeth system is what's called a 484. It's coincidentally, it's almost like her number. The numbers in the Wyeth notation system come from the wheel arrangement, and the 4 is the 4 pilot wheels located up front here, and their purpose is to help steer the locomotive through switches and curved track work to help it track better. The 8 are the drive wheels. Of course, this is the purpose of the locomotive. This is where it gets its motive power to pull the train. So it's 8 drive wheels connected by main rods here. This is a rod from the cylinders where the steam comes in. And then there's 4 trailing wheels. And the trailing wheels support the firebox of the locomotive. Basically, the boiler design here, the way it's laid out, you have a firebox. This is the boiler. There's a combustion area and then water tubes up through here to turn the water into superheated steam. And this is the smoke box, smokestack. These devices here are called elephant ears or smoke deflectors, and they're there to create an airflow that would loft smoke out of the visibility range of the engineer and fireman, because at speed, the laminar flow over the locomotive would tend to hold smoke down over the locomotive, so this would help give them a clear line of vision. This is the sand dome, where sand and steam dome. Sand is stored in here to provide traction for the locomotive and getting started on slippery rail. It also, the other half is the steam dome, which serves to collect the superheated steam, which is used to drive the locomotive. And this is the tender, and this is a unique tender. It's called a centipede tender. It has a 4-wheel truck, a bogie assembly up here, and a 10-wheel, which has helped to spread the considerable weight of this tender. A few more details about number 844 in the FEF3 class. Her drive wheels are 80 inches in diameter, and that's a fairly sizable drive wheel for a steam locomotive. And she is 114 feet 3 inches from the front pilot to the rear coupler, and that's a sizable locomotive. The total operating weight of this locomotive is 912,250 pounds, so nearly 500 tons. That's a big piece of machinery. Currently, she burns number 5 fuel oil. Originally, she was set up to burn coal, but now in her excursion service, she's been converted to fuel oil because of the easier handling, and it burns cleaner than coal. Her tender holds 24,000 gallons of water in this area here, the fuel bunker up here. The boiler produces steam at 300 pounds per square inch, and that's a very high pressure boiler for a steam locomotive, but that's what gives her power. Her cylinders, where the steam enters and actually drives the piston back and forth to drive the drive wheels, have a 25-inch bore and a 32-inch stroke, so that's a pretty massive cylinder. Theoretically, the FEF3 class is capable of a top speed of 120 miles per hour, but it's never been noted that they've actually operated at that speed, although it's officially been recorded that this class of locomotive has rather regularly pulled passenger trains at a sustained 100 miles per hour. The power output of this locomotive is 4,500 horsepower, and that brings up an interesting point. Steam locomotives do not develop maximum horsepower at start. In fact, they have very little horsepower at start, and that's why they tend to be kind of slippery. You've seen steam locomotives start trains and slip. That's a common feature. Diesel locomotives, on the other hand, have an immense amount of power to start a train moving, and that's one of the reasons railroads went to them in the 1940s and 50s. By the mid-1950s, the Union Pacific was completely dieselized, and steam locomotives were phased out shortly after that. But as far as steam locomotives go, 844 and her FEF3 class sisters represent probably the epitome of steam locomotive engineering and design. So she's a very modern locomotive in steam locomotive terms. Roller bearing equipped throughout with the latest metallurgy used in her boiler construction. She's a modern steam locomotive in every sense of the word. Okay, this is the second of my favorite Union Pacific locomotives that I have a model of, and this is Challenger number 3985. And she was intended to speed critical wartime freight operations on the grades across Wyoming and the Wasatch Range in Utah. 3985 was part of the fourth group of Challengers built for Union Pacific by the American Locomotive Company in Schenectady, New York. She was built in July 1943 and carried builder serial number 70174. There's some interesting things to note about this locomotive. She's what we call an articulated. You'll notice, different than number 844, there's actually two engines located under this boiler. This type of locomotive was invented by Anatole Mallet, a Swiss engineer, mechanical engineer, originally for European operation, and they were adopted by American railroads in the early 1900s. The first one was built in 1904 by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. 3985 is what we call a simple articulated. Articulated locomotives came in two forms. They're simple and compound. A simple articulated takes equal pressure steam on both engines. The steam dome here routes high pressure steam to the rear engine and the front engine, so they operate at the same pressure. A compound articulated is a little more involved. It takes the high pressure steam and routes it to the rear engine, and then instead of exhausting that steam, it's forwarded to the front engine where there are larger cylinders to run on lower pressure steam to extract more power from the steam. Compound articulateds generally operate at lower speeds. They're useful for very heavy freight drags. They were not as popular on American railroads as they were on European railroads. The one big exception being the Norfolk and Western Railroad, which had great success with compound articulateds moving very heavy coal trains, where speed was not an issue, but pulling power was an issue. Whereas the Union Pacific, among others, wanted these locomotives for a combination of pulling power and speed, so they were better suited to that kind of service than a compound articulated. This locomotive ran trains across the Union Pacific system, as I said, concentrated initially in Wyoming and the Wasatch Range in Utah, but they found their way across the entire system. Now, number 3985 was part of this fourth group. As I said, there was a fifth group, a final group, built in 1944, again, because of heavy wartime traffic demands. She was built by the American Locomotive Company in Schenectady, New York, and carries serial number, as I said, 70174. In the Wyeth notation system, 4664 is actually called a Challenger because the Union Pacific was the first to build these engines. They called them Challengers, and the name stuck to that wheel arrangement. A few details about number 3985. She has 69-inch driving wheels, is a total length of 121 feet 11 inches, a total weight in operating condition of just over 1 million pounds at 1,073,900 pounds. She burns number 5 fuel oil, although she was originally built to burn coal. The boiler pressure is 280 pounds per square inch. These cylinders have a bore of 21 inches and a stroke of 32 inches, and she was rated for a maximum speed of 70 miles an hour, with a power output of 5,000 horsepower. The Challengers were a very successful design locomotive. The Union Pacific had 105 of them ultimately in the 5 different subclasses of Dash 1 through Dash 5. Several other railroads had some Challengers based on the success the Union Pacific had, Northern Pacific being one of them, Western Maryland being another. The design was very well balanced. It was found its use actually in express freight and even in some passenger trains. It's a very smooth riding locomotive. Number 3985 was returned to tourist service, to excursion service by Union Pacific in the late 1960s, and she's found service up until about 2010 when she was sidelined by mechanical issues that needed some rather heavy maintenance. As a result of that, she's been in storage in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and was officially retired in January of this year, 2020, although she's being kept with the expectation that someday she will receive all the complete rebuilding she needs to be returned to service. Part of this was done because the Union Pacific wanted to return number 4014, a big boy, which I'll show some video of later, to service, which they did in time for the centennial of the driving of the Golden Spike, the 150th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike in 2019. And now 4014 and 844 are the two big excursion engines of Union Pacific. And I'll show some video of 4014 operating later. Although, for me, I will not get a model of 4014 because I modeled the Union Pacific in 1985 to 1995. And during that time period, it was 3985 and 844, which were the big draw engines for their publicity runs. Finally, I'd like to take a little bit of opportunity to talk about my third and last locomotives in the collection of Union Pacific's heritage fleet, which is what they call their fleet of historic locomotives now, with number 844 and big boy number 4014. And in the time that I'm modeling it, had number 844 and Challenger number 3985. And then these three diesels, which actually operate as one unit. This number 949, 963B, and 951 are E8, E9 diesel locomotives built by the Electromotive Division of General Motors for Union Pacific and delivered in June of 1955. And these were some of the last streamlined passenger locomotives specifically built for passenger service, diesel locomotives. And Union Pacific had a sizable fleet of these, but they preserved three of them for their heritage fleet. And they operate in the same kind of publicity operations that the two steam locomotives operate in. And they have since been upgraded to modern diesel locomotive standards, so that while they look historically accurate as they did when they were first built on the outside, inside they've been completely redone with modern electronics, prime movers. Each unit is a 2,000 horsepower unit, and in the Wyeth notation system, these are referred to as six-wheel truck locomotives. Okay, there's three axles on each truck. We call this structure a truck. And in the specifically Wyeth system, when it comes to diesel or electric locomotives, we use a letter to denote a powered axle and a number to denote an unpowered axle. Now these have six-wheel or three-axle trucks, but they only have electric traction motors on the two outer axles. So these are called an A1A locomotive. And so you have three units here. These two end units are what are called cab units, and this is a booster unit. Each one produces 2,000 horsepower. Together they produce 6,000 horsepower, and they can move a passenger train at 100 miles an hour. I think not only the overall design of the locomotives, but this classic Union Pacific yellow and gray paint scheme is really a classy looking scheme. And I think for the money, they're some of the handsomest diesel locomotives ever used in passenger service. And after this, I'm going to show a couple clips of these locomotives, the real locomotives in the service. And also I'll show a little bit about 4014, the big boy, which I'm not going to have a model of, I don't think, because it's not typical for my time period that I'm modeling, but it's an impressive locomotive nonetheless.